All right. Let's talk about evangelism, and we are on the lesson of excuses. Now, this is what we talked about last week. And these are personal excuses that people give, and we are just fielding these questions, what people say regarding, okay, I'm not ready yet, was the last one. There are things I'm not ready to give up. We just talked about some of that. So let's move on to this one. These are people excuses. And so in this one, this involves, we're categorizing their excuses in a different fashion. So these involve my folks would object, or my friends would object. Or here's one, there's hypocrites in the church. You've ever heard that one? Or I'm waiting for someone else. I'm waiting for my wife. I'm waiting for my husband. I'm waiting for someone. Or I have had my feelings hurt. And then I don't know how the last one got on there. I don't like the minister. I have no idea who put that slide up there. I thought, what? That surely is not any, that is not a viable option there. But anyway, well, no, wait a minute. It's just, yeah, I know it is. And that's always the case, that's possible. That, okay, I don't like the minister. I don't like, whatever. Okay, so let's talk about some of these. And all we're doing is seeking to bring people to Christ. At the same time, we need to handle some of the objections. We've brought a person along in study, and now we're kind of at a stopping place, a little a hurdle here. So the first one is, all right, my folks would object, or my friends are going to object on that. So what would be, how would you handle that one? By the way, I want to say this one. First of all, that is probably the most formidable obstacle that we will face, really. My family is not going to accept this. They're all such and such denomination, and they're not going to be happy with this at all. So how would you handle that? Well, let's think about how would that be? Did his family object to when he became a Christian? Or did his family object, or was it his Jewish? I'm talking about my mom, my dad. They became members of a particular church. Yeah, we don't know about his family. So I'm thinking about someone who says, my dad is a Catholic and he's going to disown me. My mom is a Catholic, she's going to disown me. Now, some of you have been in that kind of position, haven't you? I have come across people who said, I told you about the example. I studied with a person who was in the United Baptist Church in East Kentucky, and he told me, I see it, I see the truth, but my family, my wife's family, my mom and dad, they're going to disown me. It's going to be total disruption in my family. They're not going to be happy with it. So, all right, how do we deal with that? Well, that's actually a good point. That we need to point people to their heavenly family, which is obviously the very primary consideration, the heavenly family. Remember, there are several passages, such as in Luke chapter 9, where Jesus tells us, he that loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He that does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. We really have, for the most part, not had to face that in our country. Now, most of the time, we get through it. Family might have a little bit of difficulty and that kind of thing, but most of the time, we don't have to face it quite like that. There have been times, I remember reading about an Arkansas preacher, John Fry, I believe it was, who baptized a woman in a river, and he came, and her husband came and tried to shoot him, tried to kill him, tried to kill the preacher for baptizing. He said, so some people get a little bit riled on that. So anyway, but the point is, indeed, we have to love God more than our family, and it is a difficult hurdle to overcome. Yes, ma'am. Right, so here's another, and you made me think of it, another wrinkle in the same thing, and that is some people don't want to obey the gospel because by doing so, they are tacitly saying, my family, they're all in this particular church, they're lost. Because I am saying, all right, I need to be baptized for the remission of sins, and they don't believe in that at all. And so I'm saying by my statement that they're lost. Now, I've had a lot of people come to that particular point. I don't want to confess that my family is wrong. Well, so here's how I handle that. I try, but it's not always successful, and it's very seldom successful, but I try to back up and say, well, do you believe your family's honest? Is your family, is your mother honest? Are your mother who's passed now, your father, was he an honest individual? He did what he thought was right. If you see the truth and you don't do it, you're not being as honest as your parents. If you see the truth that I need to be baptized for the remission of sins, it is dishonesty now with yourself and with God not to do it. But you're not living up to the standard of your parents who were honest, you say, because they did what they thought was right. You need to do what you know is right. And that's but that's still a very difficult hurdle. Yes, ma'am. You know, and that's a good passage is like Romans chapter 14, verse 11 and 12. We shall all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, saith the Lord, to me every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess to God. Each one of us must give an account of himself to God. Yes, ma'am. That's Romans 14, 11 and 12. That's true. So that will be one of those texts is in Luke 9, I believe it's verse 26 and following, about loving our family more than Christ, or Mark chapter 10. And he tells us there plainly that family has to be secondary. Mark 10, I think, is verse 30 or so. Well, that's just a famous, I think it's a famous cop-out to say organized religion. Okay, let's just go back to the Bible. What do we have here? Were they organized? Yes. So, yes, sir. And that is how people are going to react. And that's, what do you do at that point? It's very, very challenging. So these are some of the things that you can think about, but it is, I think, probably the biggest hurdle that we will face. And Jesus tells us that, man's foe shall be they of his own household, right? So that is something that it is an emotional thing, but we do need to think about how to handle it as gently as we can. All right, let's look at number 2. There are hypocrites in the church. Now, have you ever heard that one? We all have, haven't we? There are hypocrites in the church. Well, hypocrisy, some philosopher said, hypocrisy is really something that is a tip of the hat to what you know is right. In other words, people recognize there's something right. If they don't live up to it, you recognize what is right, and you know that when people are not living that way. And so I think we need to think, but here's something else. So this is maybe not, as you're studying with someone, it's maybe not time to get into this discussion, but I think that word hypocrisy is way overused, and it is not someone who does not live up to a standard. That's nothing to do with hypocrisy. Because hasn't that been the case with all of us at one point? Hasn't it always been the case that we don't live up to the standard? Yes. That doesn't make people hypocrites. Hypocrisy is deception, such as in Matthew 15, where the Pharisees substituted their own man-made laws for the laws of God. And the idea of hypocrisy is deceiving, just putting a mask on, and it's not about people who are trying and not living correctly. It's about deception. But be that as it may, once again, we come to the same passage in my mind that we talked about in the last point, and that is Romans chapter 14. We will all stand before God to give an account of how we have lived, whether they be good or bad, the deeds good or bad. That's Romans chapter 14, 11, and 12. And that is, we shall give an account, each one give an account of himself to God. I'm not going to give an account to you, of you, and you of me. And I'll be stripped away of all of that also. So it is interesting that people can see that people are not living correctly. And we're told that would be that way in Matthew chapter 14. There's a text here, I think it's in verse 47. I think it's chapter 14, verse 37, where Jesus talks about the net having been gathering up so many people, and it gathers up the good fish and the bad fish. Let me see, I think I have that jotted down. Yes, 13 and 47. So again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered every kind, which when it was filled, they drew it upon the beach. They sat down, gathered in the good vessels, but the bad they cast away. That's the kingdom of God. It does gather a lot of people. in the sense that there are people who attach themselves to it who are not truly dedicated, and that's one of the truths of the Bible. So we need to recognize that that is the case. And so something else is, well, would you rather spend some time with the hypocrites here, or if you're not faithful to God, what? You'll, in eternity, and where are all those hypocrites going to be? They're all of them are going to be there. You're going to spend time with some hypocrites somewhere. That is, if you have that disposition, right? That's just the way life is, Bruce. Right. You know, and he pointed out, just because people have faults doesn't make them hypocrites. So we do need to think about that, and that's important. So hypocrisy, it's one of those overused words that really we bandy it about so frequently, and I think really unfairly, to tell you the truth. So it is an excuse. So, but the point is, we are going to give an account for ourselves before God, and it involves faithfulness to the church. So that's one way that I try to approach it. So anything else on that? All right, let's look at number 3. I'm waiting for someone else. I'm waiting for my wife. I'm waiting for my husband. I like to wait for them to be baptized. I want to put it off until that particular point. Have you ever had anybody say that? So yeah, they want to do it with their spouse. They want to do it with someone else. But here's good questions regarding it. Okay, how long have you been waiting? How long is the person that you're waiting on? How long have you been waiting for that person? And how long do you intend to wait for that person? How long do you intend to wait? Sometimes, because usually say, well, whenever, that really means never. It just puts it off. Just like we talked about when people say that regarding, I'll do it later. Well, just when? Put a date on it. So how long have you been waiting for that person? How long would you intend to wait? Is there any time limit that you're going to say, okay, that's enough? I don't think that's out of the place to put people on the spot and say, okay, what do you intend to do by that? Here's something else. I jotted this down. Waiting has the effect of pushing the other person by placing responsibility on them. That is to say, if I say, I'm going to wait for my wife, Anita, to be baptized before I am baptized, well, I'm really pushing someone else. And that's something I think we need to recoil from, pushing someone else. I'm not going to do it until, well, that puts a lot of pressure on her, doesn't it? And we kind of do that kind of thing. I'm going to wait for her to make the decision. Well, that puts a lot of pressure on her. Whether I'm going to be saved or not depends upon what the decision she makes. That's unfair pressure on people. And I'm going to say this: we kind of do that a lot of times anyway. We put unfair pressure on other people by just, I'm not going to do this because I'm just going to wait someone else to do it. Well, you're kicking the can down the road. You're not taking a leadership position. You're not leading yourself. You're not taking a strong position. And I'm just mashing on someone else. Yes, ma'am. Now you're placing the responsibility on someone else. And that is really unfair pressure on that someone else. Isn't it sad that people do that? But we actually do that all the time on a lot of small little issues that come up. We put pressure on other people, and instead of saying, here's my decision, I'm going to go with that. We just kind of do it the other way. We put pressure on other people. So that's really an unfair thing to think about. So we might just have that in the back of our mind if someone says, I'm waiting for someone else. How about this one? I've had my feelings hurt. All right. Everybody has been right here. I've had my feelings hurt. In the congregation that you're talking about, Bill, my feelings were hurt. Here's what happened. Blah, blah, blah. I have my feelings hurt. All right. So now we're going to get back into a little bit of a counseling mode here. So what should we do here on this one? Well, that happens to a lot of people. And so one thing, okay, I don't know all the situation there, but when it comes to the truth, I don't think we need to back up from speaking, here's truth, here's what adultery is, and here's what not. I don't think we need to back up from that. But at the same time, we need to be careful about things that we say and talk about to people or about people. We need to be careful about that because we do offend people, and we might drive them away. Sometimes a joke around. Maybe I think, well, maybe that's a little bit too much because I don't know that they know that I was really being in humorous mode here. But we do need to be careful about that. So I do sympathize with people who get their feelings hurt sometimes. I really do. However, there are a few things other to think about. What might we think about? It is going to happen. It is going to happen. So I'm going to say this, that as I said, you're going to be in a counseling mode. That means I think it's wise to listen patiently. Just listen to the grievance. A lot of people are going to have grievances. Listen to the grievance. We don't have to sympathize, because that's, oh boy, I understand that. Well, I hesitate to do that. That's, a counselor's told, okay, you don't go in there sympathizing, because you don't know the other side of the what? The story. You don't know the other side of the story. So, and there's always another side to things. So you listen patiently, don't sympathize. At the same time, I would not scoff. That's ridiculous. I don't do that either, because that just puts people in a real defensive position, doesn't it? They say, okay, he thinks I'm silly. I may. And I'll tell you the truth, when I hear some people giving excuses, sometimes I walk out of there and think, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard in my life. I cannot believe that people are so thin-skinned. I've thought that many, many times. What? So I try to not show emotion one way or the other. I listen patiently, and then I try to derail it and go on about my personal responsibility, what we were talking about. What is my personal responsibility? And personal responsibility as far as forgiving people and being together as a family. And that's important too. Lisa? So it's easy. I am going to say this. It's a simple solution for a lot of people to put all problems, such as, all right, there's sin here, and we're not dealing with sin in the camp, onto, well, your feelings are hurt, because that takes the onus of responsibility from my shoulders and throws it on you. And that's unfair too. As a leader, we need to deal with certain problems that arise in the church, not to say that we need to go be a Snoop Dogg around in town and to figure out, who's doing what and what's going on, and I'm going to hire spies and people to go search on something. No, something comes to our attention, sometimes things need to be dealt with. And it is sad that leaders frequently are unwilling to deal with it, and instead they're throwing the responsibility on you for objecting and say, you know what, I think you need to do something about this. So it's not, and by the way, it's not about the fact that people come in that are in sin. The point is, sometimes leadership of churches actually endorse positions by utilizing individuals in leadership roles in the church. So I think that's important for us to think about. Yes, go ahead, Lisa. I'm going to tell you what, Dan will be able to testify to this kind of thing in the Air Force. Leaders in the Air Force, such as Dan, you see that kind of stuff going on in the Air Force, and someone comes up and says, you know what, some junior airman saying, you know what, I'm just living with her as a platonic relationship. He's going to be saying, look, here's the deal. You're going to have to clean it up, and you're going to have to quit portraying that, because that's immoral. And isn't that right? I mean, that's basically, you're going to have to deal with it. You're not going to put up with this. Oh, okay, we're all living together. Now I take it probably that's how it's going to have to go. Not to throw you on the spot. Well, let me give you an illustration. Let me give you an illustration. I'm going to kind of give the cat out of the bag. I was going to use this for an illustration next week for the sermon, but I'm going to change it up a little bit. This happens to Scott, my brother. He was commandant, officer training school, and the mission statement of the Air Force, you're going to have upstanding moral character. Well, that doesn't set well with some people. So the junior officers had a problem in different flights. And one of the flights had a guy, for example, and it made it more difficult. I'm going to tell you right now, he was a minority. So you know what? You're going to have government behind you on this. So he was early in the morning, get up, and he'd go be with a married woman. and they were going to the gym and working out and all this kind of stuff, and it didn't look good. And so they were having trouble with all of this, and they had. Here's another example. It's kind of similar. A man was on a technically pornographic site, but it was not classified as pornography in the Air Force. It was just one of those. I don't know how they. But anyway, and he was kind of and women officers were seeing this, and they would say so. They were dealing with that in the flight, and they told him to quit it. Flight commander. They finally came to him and said, here's what's going on. He says, all right, he asked him all the staff. He says, what do you suggest? One would say, okay, I think you need to give him a stern warning. Same thing with the guy working out with the woman. Another one, stern warning. He said, went around to all of them, give him a real stiff warning on this. The guy said, you know what? No, he's out. He's out. Because if we don't have a standard of moral character, this is what this is about. If you don't have a standard of moral character, you don't have anything. He's out. Now, I'm not saying elders, I'm not talking about kicking out people, but I am saying there has to be a standard. And he said, that kind of, everybody went, huh. Well, so now that example is utilized by the Pentagon as what to do when you have immorality going on at the base. Even though the man that was kicked out, went to the congressman, his congressman. And Congress got involved in putting pressure on Scott, said, you got to reinstate this guy. He says, no, not going to. No, he's out. Here's the standard. He violates the standard. He was warned repeatedly by his flight commander. One of the guys, he brought him in, he says, you know what? I'm going to say this, you need to go get help. You're on pornography. That's an addiction, but you're not going to get help on the Air Force's dime, and you're out. Well, you know what happened after that? Everybody started walking a straighter line. But, well, I tell you what, it was kind of challenging. So I say that simply to point out, there are standards, but Dan's correct. People come in here, we have a lot of problems. People have a lot of problems. We're not going to be, but if the leadership is going to, they're the ones airbrushing over, say, okay, we got people who are homosexuals here. Something needs to be said regarding homosexuality. Eventually, sometime, right? I would think so. Someone's got to say something. Do we or not? The same thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan. It is, and it's. I think every case has to be handled differently, as you do. I mean, there are a lot of challenges to it. So, but there are standards, and we need to remind ourselves of those. And my personal impression, back to what Lisa had to say, is that most leadership in the churches today are themselves airbrushing over and do not want to deal with issues in the church at all. That's my impression. And okay, David first. You know, I would say this, that they need to make a statement. I think that's correct. I wouldn't say they have to necessarily in public services do it, but there's nothing wrong with having someone get up and say, you know what, Bill Lockwood has repented and he wants to ask for the prayers of the church for what he's done, recognizing, as you said, that what was going on was wrong. And that's correct. I think that's correct. Right, that's right. Right, and if people came in here and were worshiping with us consistently and living in sin, then eventually I'm going to say something, but I'm not, at the same time, it's kind of a thing where I don't want to say, okay, let's have you teaching a class, or let's have you waiting on the table, something like, because that gives you a public endorsement of what's going on, even though that would be wrong. And so I think we all agree on that. But sometimes those are all challenging issues. But a lot of people, where are we on this one? I had my feelings hurt. So, but anyway, those are some of the issues and how I try to handle them. I sympathize with everybody's comments in here, Dan and Lisa and everybody, and Marcy, but some of them are pretty tough. And so I think we need to deal with them. But my problem is too frequently we don't ever deal with anything at all. Yeah, and you know what, and I think that's a good illustration, and what we don't ever want to get into is having become a detective agency where we're all running around trying to figure out what other people are doing on their off time and drawing conclusions about things that we really don't know about. And that sometimes happens, and I think we get into trouble on that one, and we cause a lot of rifts in churches. And I can give you a lot of illustrations where that's happened. So, all right, it's time for class to be over, but I do want to look at the last one real quickly. I know there's nothing to say here. But what would you say? Okay, I don't like the minister. I don't like the preacher. Well, a lot of times that's the kid because he's pointing out flaws that people have, and I don't care for that. We've had people, honestly, we've had people that were here when I first came here that left because they didn't like something I said. And I didn't know what it was. I'd have, like, what exactly was it? And I'd go to them and say, you said blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so sometimes it is. So it's not just, it happens probably all ministers. All right, Lisa, she has something to say here, so, all right. Well, you know what, and those are two very different issues. And that kind of situation, I understand I would be out of that congregation if they were still in the pulpit. And in that situation, I think we'd handle that a little bit more delicately. But anyway, so we can start right here next week. I want you to just think about all these I don't like the minister ideas, and we'll just start right there, and we'll take up and run with it. So I don't know if you can come back next week or not, Dorsey, but you probably have plenty to say on that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Thank you for your participation.